The flickering blue light of a television screen cast long, dancing shadows across the living room of the Miller family's suburban home in Northwood, New Hampshire. It was August 12, 2015, a sweltering summer evening that clung to the air with a thick, humid embrace. 17-year-old Sarah Jenkins, a bright and responsible high school senior, was babysitting for the Millers' two young children, 6-year-old Lily and 8-year-old Ben. The familiar, comforting drone of a late-night talk show host's monologue was the only sound that punctuated the otherwise silent house, a sound that would soon be swallowed by an unnerving and enduring quiet. Sarah was the kind of teenager every parent hoped for, reliable, kind, and with a maturity that belied her years. She had been babysitting for the Millers since she was 15, becoming an almost integral part of their family routine. Tonight was no different from any other. She'd tucked the children into their beds with whispered promises of pancake breakfasts and stories of faraway lands, the scent of lavender from their freshly washed pajamas lingering in the hallway. Now, with the house settled into a peaceful slumber, she relaxed on the floral patterned couch, her textbook for her upcoming AP history class resting on the cushion beside her, momentarily forgotten in favor of the mindless entertainment on the screen. The Millers, David and Karen, were attending a charity gala in nearby Portsmouth, a rare night out for the busy parents. They had left with reassuring smiles, promising to be home by midnight. "Don't wait up, Sarah," Karen had said, her voice warm with gratitude. "We trust you completely." These words, meant to be a simple expression of confidence, would later echo in their minds with a haunting, tragic irony. The trust they placed in her was absolute, just as her sense of security within the four walls of their home seemed unshakable. As the minutes ticked past midnight, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the house. The ordinary sounds of the night, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, seemed to amplify in the growing silence. Sarah, usually so attuned to her surroundings, appeared to be engrossed in the television, her back to the large bay window that overlooked the darkened street. A sense of unease, however, began to creep into the periphery of the seemingly tranquil scene, a silent premonition of the events that were about to unfold. When the Millers' car finally pulled into the driveway at 1:15 a.m., the first thing they noticed was the unusual darkness of the house. The porch light, which they always left on, was off, and the warm glow that usually emanated from the living room window was absent. A flicker of annoyance, quickly replaced by a gnawing worry, tightened in Karen's chest. David, ever the pragmatist, fumbled for his keys, dismissing her concerns with a tired wave of his hand. "She probably just fell asleep on the couch. Honey, it's late." But the scene that greeted them upon entering their home was far from ordinary. The television was on, but the screen was a cascade of static, a harsh, hissing sound that filled the otherwise silent room. Sarah's textbook lay open on the floor, its pages slightly crumpled as if it had been dropped in a hurry. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table, condensation tracing a wet ring on the polished wood. Of Sarah, there was no sign. Her purse, containing her wallet and keys, sat on the kitchen counter, but her cell phone and her copy of The Great Gatsby were gone. A frantic search of the house yielded nothing. The children were sound asleep in their beds, blissfully unaware of the rising tide of panic that was beginning to engulf their parents. Every room was as they had left it, except for the chilling void where Sarah should have been. The back door, which led to a sprawling wooded backyard, was unlocked, a detail that sent a fresh wave of fear through David and Karen. It was a door they always kept securely bolted, a silent sentinel against the darkness outside. The initial call to the Northwood Police Department was logged at 1:32 a.m. The dispatcher's calm, professional voice did little to soothe Karen's frayed nerves as she struggled to articulate the inexplicable reality of the situation. "Our babysitter, she's gone. She just vanished." The words hung in the air, heavy with a disbelief that would soon settle over the small town like a suffocating fog. The investigation began with a quiet urgency, the first officers arriving to a scene that was both disturbingly normal and terrifyingly wrong. In those first few hours, as the sun began to cast its pale morning light over the manicured lawns of the neighborhood, the reality of Sarah's disappearance began to set in. Her parents, woken by a phone call that no parent should ever have to receive, arrived at the Miller house, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and raw fear. The comfortable suburban home had transformed into a crime scene, the familiar scent of home now tainted with the sterile, metallic smell of a police investigation. The last image anyone had of Sarah Jenkins was a ghost on a television screen, a fleeting reflection in the darkened glass as the late-night show played on. Her presence, so vibrant and full of life just hours before, had been erased, leaving behind a series of unsettling questions and a silence that would stretch on for a decade. What happened in the quiet moments after midnight? Where did Sarah go? And why? The mystery had just begun, a dark and intricate puzzle with a crucial piece missing. The days following Sarah Jenkins' disappearance bled into a week of frantic, desperate searching. The small town of Northwood, typically a quiet enclave of peaceful living, was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight. News vans with their towering satellite antennas lined the once tranquil streets, their presence a constant, intrusive reminder of the town's newfound tragedy. Missing person flyers, bearing a smiling, sun-kissed photo of Sarah from the previous summer, were plastered on every storefront window, telephone pole, and community bulletin board, her hopeful brown eyes seeming to plead for a safe return. Leading the investigation was Detective Miles Corrigan of the New Hampshire State Police Major Crime Unit, a seasoned investigator with a weary, signatool demeanor. Corrigan approached the case with a methodical and relentless determination. The Miller house was meticulously processed, every surface dusted for fingerprints, every fiber of carpet scrutinized for a clue, no matter how minute. The unlocked back door became a focal point of the initial investigation, a silent invitation to an unseen and unwelcome guest. Yet despite the thoroughness of the forensic team, the scene yielded frustratingly little in the way of concrete evidence. The search expanded outward from the Miller residence in concentric circles, a painstaking effort that involved hundreds of volunteers from Northwood and surrounding towns. They combed through the dense woods that bordered the Millers' property, their brightly colored vests a stark contrast to the somber green and brown of the forest floor. They navigated treacherous terrain, their calls of Sarah echoing through the trees, only to be met with the indifferent chirping of birds and the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. The summer heat was oppressive, each day a new test of endurance for the search parties and a fresh wave of agony for Sarah's family. Interviews with friends, family, and classmates painted a consistent and heartbreaking picture of Sarah. She was a girl on the cusp of a bright future, with dreams of becoming a teacher and a passion for literature. She was not a runaway, her parents insisted, their voices cracking with a mixture of grief and frustration. She had no secret life, no hidden troubles that would compel her to simply walk away from everything and everyone she loved. Yet, the absence of any signs of a struggle, any indication of foul play within the Miller home, left investigators with a baffling and deeply unsettling puzzle. As the first week drew to a close with no significant leads, a palpable sense of despair began to settle over the community. The initial flurry of activity gave way to a somber, anxious waiting. The news crews, once a constant presence, began to pack up their equipment, their departure a silent acknowledgement of the cold, hard reality that Sarah's case was rapidly turning cold. For the Jenkins family, each passing day was a fresh torment. The hope that had once burned so brightly now, a flickering, fragile flame against the encroaching darkness of the unknown. Detective Corrigan, however, refused to let the case stagnate. He re-interviewed David and Karen Miller, passing their timeline of the evening of the gala with meticulous detail. He delved into Sarah's digital footprint, examining her social media accounts and text messages for any hint of a clandestine relationship or a pre-arranged meeting. He found nothing. Sarah's online presence was as wholesome and unremarkable as her real-life persona, a digital reflection of the girl everyone thought they knew. The lack of a digital trail was, in itself, a confounding clue. The investigation also turned its attention to the periphery of Sarah's life. A quiet, introverted classmate who was known to have a crush on her was questioned, his nervous demeanor initially raising a red flag. However, his alibi for the night of her disappearance was solid, his parents confirming he was at home, grounded for a minor transgression. A disgruntled former employee of David Miller's construction company was also looked at, but he too had a verifiable alibi, his whereabouts, confirmed by multiple witnesses. Every lead seemed to dissipate into a frustrating dead end. As the first-month anniversary of her disappearance approached, a memorial service was held in the town square. Hundreds of people gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of Candlelight, a sea of silent mourners united in their shared grief and bewilderment. Sarah's mother, her voice trembling but resolute, spoke of her daughter's kindness, her laughter, and her unwavering optimism. Her words were a poignant tribute to a life cut tragically short, a life that had become a ghost in their midst. The search for Sarah Jenkins never officially ended, but as the seasons changed and the years began to blur together, her case inevitably moved from the front pages to the back shelves of the cold case files. For Detective Corrigan, it became the one that haunted him, the one he would pull out on late, sleepless nights. The smiling face on the flyer, a constant reminder of a promise unfulfilled. The town of Northwood bore the invisible scar of her absence, a lingering sense of unease that never quite faded. A decade is a long time for a ghost to linger. It's long enough for memories to soften, for wounds to scar over, and for hope to all but extinguish. But in the case of Sarah Jenkins, a decade was also just long enough for a forgotten piece of the past to find its way back to the present. A silent witness waiting patiently in the dark to tell its story. The echoes of a missing girl were about to become a deafening roar. 10 years is an eternity in the life of a missing person case. For the Jenkins family, it was a decade of suspended grief. A relentless cycle of birthdays and holidays, marked by a painful and conspicuous absence. The world had moved on, technology had leaped forward, and the once ubiquitous VHS tape had become a relic of a bygone era, relegated to dusty attics and forgotten storage bins. It was in one such bin, tucked away in the musty corner of the Miller family's garage, that the past lay dormant, waiting for an unsuspecting hand to press play. The discovery was entirely accidental, a byproduct of a mundane weekend task. Karen Miller, now in her late 40s, had decided it was finally time to declutter the garage, a space that had become a repository for years of accumulated memories and outgrown belongings. With her children, Lily and Ben, now teenagers themselves, she waded through a sea of old toys, sports equipment, and boxes of seasonal decorations. It was Ben, now a lanky 18-year-old with a keen interest in vintage technology, who stumbled upon the box labeled Home Movies 10-15. Inside, nestled amongst a collection of tapes documenting family vacations and school plays, was a single, unlabeled VHS cassette. Its unassuming appearance gave no hint of the chilling secrets it held. Ben, intrigued by the novelty of the old format, unearthed his father's old VCR from the back of a closet, a bulky, dust-covered machine that hadn't been used in years. With a sense of nostalgic curiosity, he and Lily gathered in the living room, the same room where Sarah Jenkins had last been seen, to watch the forgotten memories of their childhood. The initial footage was exactly as expected, shaky, grainy. Clips of a younger Lily's birthday party, a trip to the beach, and Ben's first T-ball game. The images were a sweet, sentimental journey back in time, eliciting fond laughter and reminiscences from the siblings. They were so engrossed in their own past that they almost didn't notice when the familiar home movie footage abruptly ended, the screen dissolving into a brief burst of static before a new, altogether different scene began to unfold. The camera was stationary, positioned on top of the television set, providing a wide, silent view of the living room. The timestamp in the bottom corner of the screen read August 2015. The date seared into the memory of everyone in Northwood. The quality was poor, the colors washed out, but the image was unmistakable. There, on the familiar couch, was Sarah Jenkins, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the television. She was alive, seemingly unaware that she was being recorded. A profound and unsettling silence fell over the room as Lily and Ben watched the ghostly image of their former babysitter. The mundane scene was imbued with a chilling significance, the weight of the last 10 years pressing down on them. They watched as Sarah idly flipped through the channels, her movements relaxed and casual. The audio was faint, a muffled, tinny sound that captured the low hum of the television and the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets outside. It was a snapshot of the last moments of her known existence. Ben, his hands trembling slightly, had the presence of mind to call his parents, who were out running errands. His voice, usually so calm and measured, was strained with a mixture of shock and urgency. "Mom, Dad, you need to come home, now. We found something. We found a tape." The words hung in the air, a cryptic and ominous message that sent a jolt of adrenaline through David and Karen. They raced home, their minds reeling with 1,000 different possibilities, none of which could have prepared them for what they were about to see. Upon their arrival, the Millers gathered around the television, their eyes glued to the screen as the silent, ghostly drama played out before them. They watched for what felt like an eternity as Sarah sat on the couch. The normalcy of the scene, a stark and terrifying contrast to the reality of what had happened to her. The tape played on, a continuous, unedited recording of that fateful night, a silent witness that had been hiding in plain sight for a decade. The discovery of the VHS tape was a seismic event, a sudden and unexpected jolt to a case that had long been dormant. It was a relic from the past, a time capsule that had preserved a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Millers, their hands shaking, knew immediately what they had to do. With a renewed sense of urgency and a glimmer of hope they hadn't felt in years, they picked up the phone and made the call they never thought they would have to make again. Detective Miles Corrigan, now gray-haired and on the verge of retirement, felt a familiar jolt of adrenaline when he received the call from the Northwood Police Department. The name Sarah Jenkins echoed in his mind, a ghost from his past that had never truly left him. He drove to the Miller house, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. He had spent 10 years grappling with the silence of this case, and now, a forgotten piece of magnetic tape promised to finally give it a voice. The old VHS tape, now the most critical piece of evidence in a decade-old mystery, was handled with the reverence of a sacred artifact. Detective Corrigan, his face a mask of grim determination, took possession of the cassette, its lightweight plastic shell feeling impossibly heavy with the weight of its secrets. He immediately transported it to the State Police Crime Lab, where forensic video analysts, more accustomed to a world of high-definition digital files, were tasked with coaxing every possible detail from the fragile analog recording. The initial viewing at the lab was a tense and somber affair. Corrigan stood alongside the analysts in a darkened room, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. They watched as the grainy image of Sarah Jenkins once again filled the screen, a ghost from the past now under the unflinching gaze of modern technology. The first hour of the tape was unremarkable, a silent vigil of Sarah watching television, occasionally glancing at her textbook, a picture of teenage normalcy that was both poignant and deeply unsettling. The analysts worked their magic, stabilizing the shaky footage, enhancing the contrast, and isolating the faint audio track. They were able to amplify the sound, transforming the muffled hum into a clearer, more discernible soundscape. The dialogue from the late-night talk show on the television became intelligible. The sound of the refrigerator cycling on and off could be heard, and, most importantly, the subtle, almost imperceptible sounds from outside the house began to emerge from the background. Noise. As the timestamp on the video approached 12:30 a.m., a subtle but significant event occurred. The faint, rhythmic sound of a car engine could be heard, growing progressively louder as it approached the house. The vehicle, its headlights off, pulled to a stop just out of the camera's view. The engine idling for a few moments before being cut. A palpable tension filled the viewing room. This was it. This was the moment the peaceful evening was shattered. A few minutes later, the audio picked up the distinct, metallic click of the back door latch. It was a quiet sound, one that would have been easily missed in real time, but under the careful scrutiny of the analysts, it was as loud as a gunshot. Sarah, her back still to the camera, visibly tensed. She muted the television, her body language shifting from relaxed to alert. She stood up, her movements hesitant, and walked out of the frame, towards the back of the house. The living room was now empty, the silence broken only by the hiss of the muted television. The camera remained fixed on the empty room, a silent and impartial observer. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Corrigan and the analysts held their breath, their eyes glued to the screen, waiting, listening. Then, a voice. It was a man's voice, low and muffled, coming from the direction Sarah had gone. The words were indistinct, a mere murmur on the audio track, but the tone was calm, almost conversational. It was not a voice of aggression or panic. Sarah's voice followed, equally faint, but her tone was one of surprise, of recognition. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her words barely a whisper on the tape. The analysts frantically worked to isolate and enhance the exchange, but the quality was too poor to make out the man's response. The conversation was brief, lasting no more than a minute, a tantalizingly incomplete fragment of the night's events. Then came the sound that sent a chill down Detective Corrigan's spine. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, Not the back door, which had been unlocked, but a different lock, one that had not been a part of the original investigation. The sound was followed by a brief, muffled thud, and then an unnerving, profound silence. The only sound that remained was the low, persistent hiss of the television. The tape continued to roll for another hour, a static shot of the empty living room, a silent testament to the moment Sarah Jenkins vanished from her life. The car engine that had been heard earlier started up again, its sound fading into the distance as the vehicle drove away, once again without its headlights on. The living room remained undisturbed, a pristine and silent crime scene. The revelations from the VHS tape were a game-changer, fundamentally altering the narrative of Sarah's disappearance. The unlocked back door was not a sign of a break-in, but rather, it seemed, an expected arrival. Sarah knew her visitor. The conversation, however brief, suggested a prearranged meeting, not a random act of violence. The sound of the key, a detail that had been completely missed in the initial investigation, pointed to a level of access and familiarity with the Miller home that was deeply disturbing. The silent witness on the screen had spoken, and its testimony had turned the entire case on its head. The muffled male voice on the VHS tape, though indistinct, became the single most important clue in the renewed investigation into Sarah Jenkins' disappearance. Detective Corrigan and his team dedicated countless hours to re-interviewing everyone who had been a part of Sarah's life 10 years ago, playing the distorted audio clip for them, in the hope that someone, anyone, might recognize the speaker's cadence or tone. It was a painstaking process, a search for a ghost in a sea of forgotten voices. The focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. The theory of a random abduction, which had long been the prevailing assumption, was now all but discarded. The evidence on the tape pointed to someone Sarah knew, someone she trusted enough to let into the Miller house late at night. The sound of the key turning in a lock was particularly perplexing. Which lock was it? And who, other than the Millers, would have had a key? David and Karen Miller were adamant they had only ever given keys to their parents and to Sarah herself. Corrigan's team compiled a list of every male individual who had been close to Sarah in 2015, friends, classmates, boyfriends, and even the fathers of the other children she babysat for. One by one, they were brought in for questioning, their reactions to the audio clip carefully scrutinized. Most were cooperative, their memories of Sarah tinged with a sad nostalgia. They listened intently to the muffled voice, their faces etched with concentration, but none could definitively identify the speaker. The passage of a decade had clouded memories and altered voices. The investigation then turned to a more intimate circle. Sarah's ex-boyfriends. She had had 2 serious relationships in high school, both of which had ended amicably. According to her friends and family, the first, a boy named Mark, was now a married father of 2 living in another state. He was shocked to hear from the police after so many years and willingly provided a DNA sample and a voice recording. The second, a more recent ex-boyfriend named Chris, was still living in New Hampshire. He had been a person of interest in the original investigation, but his alibi had checked out. Chris, now a construction worker with a hardened, world demeanor, was less cooperative. He was resentful of the renewed scrutiny, his initial grief over Sarah's disappearance having long since curdled into a bitter resentment of the suspicion that had been cast upon him. He listened to the audio clip with a defiant scowl, his arms crossed over his chest. "I told you people 10 years ago, I was with my buddies that night," he insisted, his voice raspy from years of smoking. "That's not me on the tape." While the voice on the tape remained unidentified, the sound of the key continued to gnaw at Detective Corrigan. He returned to the Miller house, now occupied by a new family, and with their permission, conducted a thorough re-examination of every lock in the house, the back door, the front door, the garage door. None of them seemed to match the distinct, metallic sound from the tape. It was a dead end, a frustratingly ambiguous clue that led nowhere. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Lily Miller, now a pre-med student at Boston University. She had been haunted by the video, the ghostly image of her former babysitter replaying in her mind. She called Detective Corrigan late one night, her voice hesitant but certain. "The key," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I think I know what it was. There was a lockbox, a small metal one, that my dad kept in his home office. He kept important documents in it, and a spare key to his work truck. He was always so paranoid about losing it. Suddenly, a new and terrifying possibility began to emerge. The sound of the key wasn't a door being unlocked, it was a lockbox. David Miller, who had been a cooperative and seemingly grieving party throughout the investigation, was suddenly cast in a new and sinister light. His alibi for the night of the gala had been his wife, Karen. But what if she was mistaken? What if he had slipped away, leaving her at the event, and returned to the house to meet Sarah? Corrigan's team immediately began to delve into David Miller's past, searching for any hint of a secret life, any connection to Sarah that went beyond that of an employer. They discovered that his construction company had been facing severe financial difficulties in 2015, a fact he had concealed from his wife. They also uncovered a series of text messages between David and Sarah from the weeks leading up to her disappearance, messages that were far more personal and familiar than either of them had let on. The familiar face that had been lurking in the shadows of the investigation was suddenly coming into sharp and terrifying focus. David Miller, the grieving father figure, the concerned employer, was now the prime suspect. The narrative of Sarah's disappearance had taken another dark and unexpected turn, and Detective Corrigan knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was getting closer to the truth. The audio clip was played one more time, this time for a forensic linguist. The expert, after days of careful analysis, came back with a stunning conclusion. While the words were too distorted to be definitively identified, the cadence, the rhythm, and the subtle inflections of the speaker's voice were a near-perfect match to the voice of David Miller. The silent witness on the screen had finally pointed its finger. The revelation that David Miller was now the prime suspect sent shockwaves through the investigation and the community of Northwood. He was a respected local businessman, a family man, the picture of suburban respectability. The idea that he could be involved in the disappearance of a teenage girl, a girl he and his wife had entrusted with the care of their own children, was almost too monstrous to comprehend. Yet, the evidence, both old and new, was beginning to paint a deeply disturbing picture. Detective Corrigan approached the interrogation of David Miller with a quiet, calculated intensity. He knew that a direct accusation would be met with denial and deflection. Instead, he chose to slowly and methodically dismantle the perfect facade that David had so carefully constructed over the last 10 years. He began by questioning him about the financial state of his construction company in 2015, a topic that visibly unsettled the once confident man. David initially downplayed the difficulties, dismissing them as the normal ebbs and flows of a small business. But as Corrigan presented him with bank statements and internal documents that his team had subpoenaed, the cracks in his story began to show. The company had been on the verge of bankruptcy, a secret he had kept not only from the police, but also from his wife. The pressure he had been under was immense, a powder keg of stress and desperation. The conversation then shifted to the text messages between him and Sarah. David waved them off as innocent, friendly exchanges, the kind of communication one might have with a trusted babysitter. But Corrigan read the messages aloud, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Thinking of you," one of David's messages read. "Can't wait to see you Friday," Sarah had replied. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, and deeply inappropriate for a man in his position. As the interrogation wore on, David's composure began to crumble. The confident, articulate man was replaced by a nervous, fidgeting wreck, his eyes darting around the sterile interrogation room as if searching for an escape. He maintained his innocence, but his denials became weaker, less convincing. The weight of a decade of lies was beginning to crush him. Meanwhile, Corrigan's team was executing a search warrant at the Millers' former residence, the house they had sold 5 years after Sarah's disappearance. With the permission of the new owners, they focused their attention on the home office where David had kept his lockbox. Using advanced forensic technology, they scanned the floorboards, the walls, and the subflooring, searching for any trace of evidence that might have been missed in the original investigation. The breakthrough came in the form of a single, dark brown hair found lodged deep within a crack in the floorboards beneath the spot where David's desk had once stood. The hair was sent for immediate DNA analysis, a process that felt agonizingly slow to the anxious investigators. The results, when they finally came back, were a bombshell. The hair belonged to Sarah Jenkins. The discovery of Sarah's hair in David's home office was the physical evidence that connected her to a room she had no reason to be in. It corroborated the theory that the sound of the key on the VHS tape was, in fact, David's lockbox. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a dark and chilling mosaic of deceit and betrayal. The final piece of the facade to crumble was Karen Miller. Initially, she had been fiercely protective of her husband, her loyalty unwavering. But as Corrigan presented her with the evidence, the financial troubles, the intimate text messages, the discovery of Sarah's hair, her denial gave way to a dawning, horrified realization. The man she had loved and trusted for 2 decades was not the man she thought he was. In a tearful and emotional confession, Karen admitted that David had, in fact, left the charity gala for a short period of time on the night of Sarah's disappearance. He had claimed to have forgotten his wallet in the car, an excuse she had accepted without question at the time. The memory, once so innocuous, was now imbued with a sinister and terrifying significance. The perfect facade had been shattered, revealing the ugly truth that lay beneath. David Miller, the pillar of the community, was now exposed as a liar, a manipulator, and a man with a dark secret. The question that remained was the most horrifying of all. What had happened to Sarah Jenkins after she entered his home office that night? Faced with the mounting evidence and the collapse of his carefully constructed world, David Miller's wall of denial finally shattered. The interrogation, which had stretched for hours, reached its breaking point. In a low, halting voice, devoid of the confidence and charm that had once defined him, he began to confess. It was not a flood of words, but a slow, agonizing trickle of truth. A story that had been buried for 10 long years. He admitted to the affair with Sarah. It had begun, subtly, he claimed, a series of innocent conversations that gradually blossomed into a secret, illicit relationship. He was flattered by the attentions of a young, vibrant girl, an escape from the mounting pressures of his failing business and the comfortable but monotonous routine of his marriage. For Sarah, it was a dangerous and forbidden thrill, an older man who made her feel special, mature, and desired. On the night of her disappearance, he had arranged to meet her at the house after the gala. The text messages confirmed their plan. He had slipped away from the event, leaving his wife, Karen, with a flimsy excuse, his mind consumed with the anticipation of their clandestine rendezvous. He had let himself in through the back door, just as they had planned, and found Sarah waiting for him in the living room. His confession, however, diverged from the evidence in one crucial and self-serving way. He claimed that their meeting in his home office had been consensual, a continuation of their secret affair. He said they had argued, a heated disagreement about the future of their relationship. Sarah, he alleged, had threatened to expose their affair to his wife, a threat that would have destroyed his life. In his version of events, the argument escalated. Sarah, in a fit of rage, had stormed out of the house, threatening to run away and never come back. He claimed he had tried to stop her, but she was hysterical, inconsolable. He said he had watched from the doorway as she disappeared into the darkness of the night, and that he had never seen her again. He had kept the secret, he claimed, out of fear of losing his family and his reputation. But Detective Corrigan, his eyes cold and unwavering, did not believe him. The muffled thud on the VHS tape, a sound that David could not explain, told a different story. It was not the sound of an argument. It was the sound of violence. The silence that followed was not the silence of a girl who had run away. It was the silence of a girl who had been silenced. Corrigan pressed him, his questions relentless and probing. He pointed out the inconsistencies in his story, the utter implausibility of a teenage girl, with no money and no means of transportation, simply vanishing into the night. He replayed the audio from the tape, the chilling sound of the lockbox being opened, the muffled thud, the deafening silence. What was that sound? David D. asked, his voice low and menacing. What did you do to her? Under the relentless pressure of the interrogation, David's story began to unravel. His claims of a consensual encounter and a subsequent argument were exposed as a desperate attempt to mitigate his guilt. The truth, when it finally emerged, was far more brutal and tragic than anyone could have imagined. The argument had not been about the future of their relationship, but about Sarah's desire to end it. She was racked with guilt, torn between her feelings for David and the knowledge that what they were doing was wrong. She had tried to break it off, but David, obsessed and possessive, had refused to let her go. He had lured her to the house that night under the pretense of saying goodbye, but his intentions were far more sinister. In the confines of his small home office, he had begged and pleaded with her, but Sarah had stood firm. Her rejection, coupled with the immense stress of his financial ruin, had pushed him over the edge. In a fit of rage, he had struck her, a single, violent blow that had sent her falling backwards, her head hitting the sharp corner of his heavy oak desk. The muffled thud on the tape was the sound of her life being extinguished. The confession was not a moment of catharsis, but a quiet, chilling admission of a monstrous act. David Miller, the respected family man, had murdered a 17-year-old girl in a moment of selfish, violent rage. The silence that had haunted the town of Northwood for a decade finally had a voice, and it spoke of a betrayal so profound and a loss so immense that it was almost impossible to comprehend. The mystery of Sarah's disappearance was solved, but the tragedy of her death was just beginning to be understood. The confession of David Miller was a tectonic shift in the landscape of the case, but it was not the end of the story. A confession, no matter how damning, is not enough. The final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle was still missing: Sarah's body. Without it, a conviction for murder would be difficult, though not impossible, to secure. The search for Sarah Jenkins, which had been a search for a living, breathing person, now became a grim and desperate hunt for her remains. David Miller, in a desperate last-ditch attempt to bargain for a lesser sentence, agreed to lead investigators to the place where he had buried Sarah's body 10 years ago. It was a place he had never spoken of, a secret he had carried with him every single day for a decade. The weight of that buried truth had been a constant, gnawing presence in his life, a secret that had poisoned everything he touched. The location was a remote, heavily wooded area in the neighboring town of Stratford, a place that David knew well from his years as a contractor. It was a place of quiet, natural beauty, a stark and brutal contrast to the horrific secret it held. As he led a team of investigators through the dense undergrowth, his face was a mask of grim resignation, the confident facade he had once worn, now completely stripped away. He stopped at a spot marked by a cluster of birch trees, their white bark peeling like old parchment. "Here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She's here." The words hung in the air, heavy with the finality of a decade of silence. The area was cordoned off, and a team of forensic anthropologists began the slow, meticulous process of excavation. The work was painstaking and emotionally draining. The investigators, their faces grim and determined, worked in silence, their shovels and trowels moving with a somber, respectful rhythm. They sifted through the dark, loamy soil, searching for any sign, any fragment that would bring Sarah home. For the Jenkins family, who had been notified of the search, it was a day of unimaginable agony, a final, brutal confirmation of their deepest fears. After hours of careful digging, a member of the team uncovered a piece of fabric, its color faded and worn by the earth, but its pattern still recognizable. It was a piece of the floral print dress that Sarah had been wearing on the night she disappeared. The discovery sent a ripple of emotion through the search party, a silent acknowledgement that they were close. And then, they found her. The skeletal remains of Sarah Jenkins, buried in a shallow, unmarked grave, were finally brought back into the light. The silence of the forest was broken by the quiet sobs of one of the younger officers, a raw human reaction to the profound tragedy of the scene. Detective Corrigan, his face etched with a weary sadness, stood by, a silent witness to the end of a long and painful journey. The discovery of Sarah's remains was a turning point, not just for the case, but for the entire community. The ghost that had haunted Northwood for a decade could finally be laid to rest. The missing person flyers, which had become a faded, almost permanent fixture on the town's landscape, could finally come down. The question of where had been answered, but the question of why still lingered, a haunting echo of a life senselessly and brutally cut short. The weight of the buried truth had finally been lifted, but it left behind an indelible scar. Jenkins' family, though devastated, felt a strange and hollow sense of relief. They could finally bring their daughter home, give her a proper burial, and begin the long, arduous process of grieving. For Detective Corrigan, it was the end of a case that had defined a large part of his career, a case that had taught him the true meaning of patience, perseverance, and the enduring power of a silent witness. The story of Sarah Jenkins' disappearance was no longer a mystery, but a tragedy. It was a story of a bright young life extinguished by a moment of selfish rage, a story of a community united in grief, and a story of a truth that, no matter how deep it is buried, will always find its way to the surface. The final chapter of the investigation was closed, but the story of Sarah's legacy was just beginning. The trial of David Miller was a somber and emotionally charged affair, a public reckoning for a decade of deceit and a crime that had shattered the tranquility of a small town. The courtroom was packed every day, a silent audience of community members, journalists, and the grieving families of both the victim and the perpetrator. The weight of the last 10 years was a palpable presence in the room, a silent juror in the proceedings. The prosecution, led by a sharp and articulate district attorney, meticulously laid out the case against David Miller. They presented the evidence in a clear and chronological narrative, starting with the night of Sarah's disappearance and culminating in the discovery of her remains. The VHS tape, the centerpiece of their case, was played for the jury. Its grainy, silent footage, a powerful and chilling indictment of the man sitting at the defendant's table. The text messages between David and Sarah were read aloud, their intimate and inappropriate nature painting a clear picture of a relationship built on a dangerous power imbalance. The forensic evidence, including Sarah's hair found in David's home office and the DNA confirmation of her remains, was presented with scientific precision, leaving no room for doubt. The testimony of the forensic linguist, who had matched the voice on the tape to David Miller, was a particularly damning blow to the defense. Karen Miller, her face a mask of grief and betrayal, took the stand as a witness for the prosecution. In a voice choked with emotion, she recounted the events of the night of the gala, her testimony corroborating the timeline that placed David at the house at the time of Sarah's disappearance. Her words, though painful to deliver, were a powerful testament to the truth, a final severing of the ties that had bound her to a man who had lived a double life. The defense, faced with a mountain of incriminating evidence, attempted to portray David as a man who had made a terrible mistake, a man who had acted not out of malice, but out of a moment of passionate, uncontrollable rage. They argued for a lesser charge of manslaughter, painting a picture of a man who was pushed to the brink by a combination of financial stress and a volatile, emotionally charged relationship. But the jury, their faces grim and impassive, was not swayed. The cold, calculated nature of David's actions, the luring of Sarah to the house, the murder, the careful concealment of her body, and the decade of lies that followed, spoke not of a moment of passion, but of a chilling and profound lack of remorse. The muffled thud on the tape, a sound that had been the catalyst for the entire investigation, echoed in their minds, a stark reminder of the brutal reality of Sarah's death. After a trial that lasted for 3 weeks, the jury returned with their verdict. The word guilty, when it was finally uttered by the foreman, was a quiet, solemn pronouncement that brought a collective sigh of relief and a fresh wave of tears from the gallery. David Miller was found guilty of first-degree murder, a verdict that carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing hearing was a final, poignant chapter in the long and painful saga. Sarah's mother, her voice trembling but strong, delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in stunned silence. She spoke not of hatred or revenge, but of the immeasurable loss of her daughter, of the stolen future, the missed milestones, and the gaping hole that had been left in their family. Her words were a powerful and heartbreaking tribute to the vibrant, loving girl whose life had been so senselessly and brutally taken. David Miller, his face pale and drawn, declined to make a statement. He sat in silence, his eyes downcast, as the judge handed down his sentence. The man who had once been a pillar of his community, a respected family man, was now a convicted murderer, destined to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Justice, though long delayed, had finally been served. The end of the trial brought a sense of closure to the town of Northwood, but it could not erase the scars of the last 10 years. The story of Sarah Jenkins became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most perfect of facades. The community, though forever changed, had come together in their shared grief, their collective search for truth, and their unwavering support for the Jenkins family. Justice had been served, but the memory of Sarah, the bright, hopeful girl who had simply vanished while watching TV, would forever be etched in the heart of the town she had once called home. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, the town of Northwood slowly began to find its way back to a semblance of normalcy. The news vans departed, the national spotlight faded, and the rhythms of everyday life resumed. But the story of Sarah Jenkins had left an indelible mark on the community's soul, a collective memory that would not be easily erased. The case had become a part of the town's history, a dark chapter that served as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the deceptive nature of appearances. For the Jenkins family, the guilty verdict and the life sentence for David Miller brought a measure of justice, but it could not bring back their daughter. Their grief, once a raw and gaping wound, had transformed into a quiet, enduring ache, a constant companion in their daily lives. They found solace not in vengeance, but in remembrance, choosing to honor Sarah's memory by establishing a scholarship fund in her name for aspiring teachers at her former high school. It was a way of keeping her dream alive, of ensuring that her passion for education would continue to touch the lives of others. Detective Miles Corrigan, the man who had pursued Sarah's case with such relentless determination, finally retired from the police force. The resolution of the Jenkins case was a fitting, albeit bittersweet, end to a long and distinguished career. He had carried the weight of Sarah's disappearance for a decade, her smiling face on the missing person flyer a constant reminder of a promise unfulfilled. The discovery of the VHS tape, the silent witness that had finally broken the case open, was a testament to the strange and unpredictable nature of police work, a reminder that sometimes the truth can be found in the most unexpected of places. The Miller family was shattered, their lives irrevocably altered by the monstrous actions of a man they thought they knew. Karen and her children moved away from Northwood, seeking to escape the long shadow of the tragedy and the painful memories that lingered in their former home. They were victims too, in a different way, their lives collateral damage in the wake of David's deceit and violence. The perfect family facade had been a lie, and the truth, when it was finally revealed, had left them with nothing but ruins. The VHS tape, the unassuming relic that had been the key to unlocking the entire mystery, was placed into evidence, a permanent part of the case file. It was a strange and anachronistic artifact in a world of digital data and cloud storage, a reminder of a time when memories were captured on fragile magnetic tape. Its journey, from a forgotten box in a dusty garage to the centerpiece of a murder trial, was a testament to the enduring power of physical evidence, of a single, tangible object that could speak the truth when all other voices had been silenced. The house where Sarah Jenkins had spent her final moments was eventually sold again, its new owners unaware of the dark history that was contained within its walls. But for those who knew the story, the house would forever be a place of quiet, somber reflection, a silent monument to a life cut tragically short. The living room, once a scene of teenage normalcy, was now imbued with a ghostly echo, a lingering sense of a presence that could never be truly erased. The story of Sarah Jenkins is a reminder that the past is never truly past. It lingers in the quiet corners of our memories, in the forgotten objects we leave behind, and in the enduring echoes of a whisper on a forgotten tape. It is a story about the darkness that can hide in plain sight, the secrets that can fester behind a perfect facade, and the tireless pursuit of a truth that, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way into the light. In the end, it was not the shouts of accusation or the roar of the legal system that brought justice for Sarah, but the faint, almost imperceptible sounds captured on a decade-old VHS tape. It was a silent witness that spoke volumes, a ghostly echo from the past that finally gave a voice to a girl who had been silenced for far too long. The case was closed, but the memory of Sarah Jenkins and the enduring power of the truth would live on. Years later, high school students in Northwood would still be awarded the Sarah Jenkins Memorial Scholarship. Her story, a poignant and powerful lesson in their local history. Her name, once synonymous with a tragic and unsolved mystery, had become a symbol of hope, of remembrance, and of the community's unwavering commitment to never forget the girl who vanished while watching TV, and the silent witness that finally brought her home, the enduring echo of her whisper, captured on that fragile piece of magnetic tape, had become a roar, a testament to the fact that no one is ever truly gone as long as there is someone left to tell their story. Sarah Jenkins was more than just a headline, more than just a cold case file. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer, and a girl whose life, though tragically cut short, had left an indelible and lasting impact on the world. She left behind,